Lord Brabazon terror in 1909 took to the skies with a plan so fine. With the pig in tow, his plane up high, made when pigs fly, no longer alive. Pigs might fly, and now they did. Brabazon's pig soared like a kid in the first light cargo, high in the sky. The world looked up with a chuckle and a sigh. The city is up high on sky high ground.
All right, so today I'm going to tell you about when pigs flew for the first time. Because, of course, all the things that I talk about in my threads are the kind of things that people say, like when pigs fly, it's not possible. So the people of Plus Ultra do the impossible all the time. And that's one of the ways in which the truth remains encrypted. It's encrypted in impossibility, unbelievability, and humor. Like these are the three principal ways in which Plus Ultra prevents people from meddling in their business. Plus Ultra does publish everything that they do. They've done that for hundreds of years. On November 4, 1909, was the day when pigs fly. It was British aviator Lord Barbazon. He carried a little pig on an aircraft flight, and it was the first live cargo flight in the world. So that occurred on November 4, 1909. So Lord Baron Barbazon of Tara, was a conservative British politician, but he was also an avid aviator, and he made the pigs fly. So that's what he did in order to attract attention, in order to put his name in the permanent record on that day so that he could motivate the conception of a child. Iiro Saarinen was born 9 months later. He is a Finnish-American architect and industrial designer who created a wide array of innovative designs for buildings and monuments, including the General Motors Technical Center in Warren, Michigan, the passenger terminal at Dulles International Airport, just outside of Washington, D.C. Now, it's interesting because Iiro Saarinen, he was born on today in 1910. Now, it became interesting because he eventually also worked on technology buildings, such as the Bell Labs Holmdel complex. That's in Holmdel, New Jersey. Then Iiro Saarinen did the IBM Thomas J. Watson Research Center. So that one is in Yorkton Heights. His most interesting accomplishment was the IBM Pavilion at the 1964 New York World's Fair. It was in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Queens, New York, in 1964-65. It was a building to showcase IBM's technical innovations. Now, right now, we're undergoing an interesting time when it comes to AI. There's newfangled companies that are popping up that are doing AI, and they're offering us really interesting tools. Microsoft is heavily involved. Google is heavily involved. However, if we go back a few years, I remember when I was working in 2017, I also went to, capture the flags or coding competitions that teach us about Watson, which is IBM's AI solution. And I find it exceedingly strange that the only company in the world in 2018 with an AI product and paying customers was IBM. Yet today, there's a whole bunch of newfangled companies that are telling us they're doing AI and giving us really fun toys. And IBM is not talking at all throughout all of this. I think there's a reason for that. I think that IBM is still working on this, but they are the ones that are going to come out with artificial general intelligence, but like after everybody else. Anyhow, that's my prediction. That's my prediction. But today I'm talking about when pigs fly, which could also be, when we get artificial general intelligence. So I told you about the Eero Saarinen buildings. All right. So in 1964, on August 20th, my dad was invited to the New York Expo on August 20th, 1964. He was finishing up his master's thesis. He wasn't even done yet. But since my dad was conceived after the previous big exhibition in New York in 1940, it was his opportunity to be invited to meet the people that made him and be totally harvested to work on aerospace projects, which is exactly why my dad was made. Like, my grandfather actually raised my dad in order to have a master's in physics. Like, that's what my grandfather promised, like the Ronald Reagan, when he raised my dad, and he promised to produce a man with a master's degree in physics. You know what my dad wanted to do instead? My dad wanted to be a helicopter pilot. And he also wanted to be an architect, like Eero Saarinen. In fact, I think Eero Saarinen really influenced him. Like, all the people in Plus Ultra we're all like polymaths. We can sort of be guided into learning just about anything we set our minds to. So that's why, Plus Ultra could expect my adoptive grandfather to produce a guy with a master's in physics just like that, And so my dad, once he got his master's in physics, he went to work for 20 years in aerospace for the U.S. Army, and then for private corporations like U.S. No, not U.S. It was he worked with American Airlines. He worked with Air France because he worked for Le Concorde. He also worked with Transworld Airlines. So these are the three airlines that I know that he worked with in installing the teleguiding. He was working in avionics, so his stuff has to do with positioning, GPS, teleguided flying, because he started working on the first project in 1964. So August 20th is important because a lot of stuff happened on August 20th, 1964. So my dad got to meet Ronald Reagan, Dwight Eisenhower. He got to meet other people who worked for the U.S. Army. So the most important thing that happened was on that day was that the U.S. Air Force started the first of its 3,435 unmanned drone reconnaissance missions during the Vietnam War using the Ryan AQM-34 Lightbug series drone. So that started that day, right? That's the first day. It was the same day that President Lyndon Johnson signed the Economic Opportunity Act into law. That happened on the same day. And if that wasn't enough, Intelsat, the International Telecommunications Satellite Organization, was established by 11 founding nations. On the day that my dad was inducted into Plus Ultra, a secret society of saints and scientists who work in aerospace, there were so many things. Yes, the day before, on August 19th, the United States launched the world's first geostationary satellite, sending Syncom-3 into orbit in advance of the Summer Olympics in Tokyo, with a dual purpose, televising the games back to the U.S. and to provide an emergency communication link with hard-to-reach Asian trouble spots. So it was a very, very, very big day in global security on that day. And it was also the birthday party of Hiro Saarinen at the IBM building. So that was kind of a big deal. It was his birthday, and it was cover for the 4th wedding of Marilyn Monroe. So on that day, Marilyn Monroe, who had moved away from her job as a public figure, she was now living in Chicago with her 4th husband, John Bubbles. He was a wonderful, wonderful tap dancer who bit the bullet and married Marilyn Monroe. So my dad conceived a child. So my dad was selected by the First Lady for his first conception. So the First Lady of the United States, it's the group of the First Ladies. You can figure out who they are, right? They're married to the president. Okay, so the First Ladies, they manage the Plus Ultra reproduction program, which makes all the people who will have a public-facing role in the future. So this is the conception day of Brooke Shields. And she seemingly comes from my dad. She is seemingly the reincarnation of a First Lady who comes from my dad and the First Lady, which at the time was the Lady Bird Johnson. You know, like Brooke Shields was conceived to work in for the First Ladies. And yeah, she did. So you know that Brooke Shields worked as a honeypot model, right? And since she was a little kid. So the thing with that is that it comes from the Roosevelt family. Like in 1904, Annie Oakley promoted women in service in special operation roles in the U.S. Army, and President Roosevelt took in Annie Oakley and her sharpshooters, but they worked as something more. They went undercover as women of the night or as in any capacity. Like the sharpshooting women of Annie Oakley developed themselves as honeypots. And they presented themselves as prostitutes, as singers, as, you know, like painters, various other, as waitresses, you know. And they became kind of like, you know, when you used to watch The Dukes of Hazzard, you know, it's a girl and 2 guys. And the girl is always in the right place in the right time to hear the most important information. And then she relates it to her brothers, and the brothers come in and save the day. Brooke Shields does talk about how, you know, when she was younger, she was sort of like objectified, sexualized. She talks about how lecherous adults were and stuff like that. But I think that I can say this about, you know, my life too. I think that when you're a kid and you're a little bit lit up, all that you can do is, you know, like notice how the adults are being kind of weird. Anyway, in my life, I know that when I was a kid, you know, of course, the people around me are kind of exemplary, like my dad, for instance, you know, he's an exemplary person. But generally speaking, like people that my friends' parents or people like that, like I always thought they were kind of weird and sketchy. You know, like I always thought that adults were kind of weird and sketchy. They didn't do anything wrong. I just thought they were weird and sketchy. But it's part of being a kid, you know, who can pause and observe people. Like I very specifically remember intently listening to adults when I was a kid. That's kind of how I know my dad worked at the Playboy Mansion because I heard him recount something that happened when he was working installing the listening devices at the Playboy Mansion in 1974. And so that's, he said the word, you know, so I remember it. Because my dad had Brooke Shields, 65. In 1974, he installed the listening devices at the mansion. In 1975, he went to Monaco and actually went to France to start working on the he was working on the Caravelle before the Concorde, you know, because that's the spy plane. But he was invited to a party in Monaco, and there he got to meet Jacques Cousteau. I thought that was the most important man in the world after Elvis Presley when I was 5 years old, and he showed me a picture of that. But anyhow, Jacques Cousteau is kind of a big deal. And also, who was there? Louis Malle. So my dad got to meet Louis Malle, you know, and chat with him before he made that movie, Pretty Baby, with Brooke Shields. So anyhow, in return for my dad giving Brooke Shields to the national security community and to Bob Hope and Hugh Hefner to work with as a honeypot child, Hugh Hefner sent me to my dad. So this represents like an equal exchange between two people who are executing a national security operation. So I got stashed to be forgotten with my dad, Leo, and Hugh Hefner and his father, Bob Hope, worked with Brooke Shields in order to cause lust in people. It worked very, very well. Everybody thought Brooke Shields was the cutest thing that ever happened, no matter who they were. So then the whole point of Pretty Baby is pretty simple. It is a honeypot film that features triggers that will incite pedophiles to brag about their desires. So it's a trick, you know. So you poke the pedophile and give the pedophile language or something to talk about or an idea, you know, so that they're going to open up to another person. Then they were invited to the Playboy Mansion for what we call in French a dîner de con. So a dîner de con is a dinner or a party where 50% of the guests are in on the joke and 50% of the guests are the joke. So in these parties, people like, you know, I'm going to name Gene Simmons because Gene Simmons is like the mirror of the Krampus monster. So he's specifically there to, you know, like trigger all the Krampus monsters in the U.S. population. That was his job. So people like Gene Simmons, you know, like are going to chat and they're going to say something sick and they're going to encourage you to tell them the weirdest shit you ever heard. And this is the crux of a dîner de con, you know, it's like half the people make the other half talk. And then if like, no matter what the guests say, the job of the people who are there to hear, the people with the big ears, their job is to be cheerleaders, is to be supportive, to be friendly, to be encouraging, and all that. And then the person who has to listen to all these sickos bring up Brooke Shields, the current, you know, like girl of the moment at a Playboy party, is my dad. So my dad was in charge of listening to sickos gossip about Brooke Shields, who had just starred in Pretty Baby around 1977 or something. Like, that was his job. And I can't believe how gross it was to have to listen to this, you know, because the thing is that the people who are in national security, they have a clearance and they are official cheerleaders. So if they're going to say the sickest shit, you know, because they're trying to get the other person in front of them to reveal themselves as the same. So all of these comedians that you remember making inappropriate jokes that have to do with children or sex or whatever, they're not pedophiles. They're trying to identify, to see, to talk to the people who are like that in the audience. A clown's job is to encourage the people they meet to reveal themselves instantly. And clowns are pretty good at this because they are quick to say what somebody doesn't expect. Therefore, they are able to detect the true nature of the person they're talking to via micro-expressions. Clowns are really, really good at this. Clowns like surf a certain place, like clowns surf humiliation. And this turns on people who like to humiliate other people. So there's like, clowns are the most amazing psychological warfare professionals that have ever existed. And if you take time to listen to them, you can hear them communicate on 5 layers of information at the same time. Do not ever underestimate a clown. And before you call somebody a clown, you better make sure they went to clown school.
Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving.
Let your request be made known to God.